This week, our natural resources minister was in China looking to get China to invest in Canada's oil sands, telling them Canada's mind is open to the idea. The future between Canada and China looks to be off to a solid start. We're into exploratory free trade talks, and the Canadian government has already sent some strong signals it is open where other governments have been closed. And that has some people worried. For example, this week we learned the Canadian government allowed a Chinese communications company to acquire Norsat International in Vancouver. Norsat's clients include NATO, the Pentagon, and funny enough, the Taiwanese Army. Maybe not so funny to the Taiwanese. What's more, the deal was allowed without a formal national security review, and it gets worse for the Minister of Innovation, Navdeep Bains, because he said repeatedly in question period that it had. Take a listen.
Mr. Speaker, under the Investment Canada Act, all transactions are subject to a national security review. So we followed the process. I want to take this opportunity to correct the record because the member opposite is saying that this particular transaction was not subject to a national security review. That is not the case.
Was there or was there not a full national security?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, under the Investment Canada Act, all transactions are subject to a national security review and making sure that the process was followed. So under this particular transaction, and as I said, all transactions, we followed the law. We made sure we did our homework, we did our due diligence, and any feedback that we receive from the national security agencies is taken seriously and taken into account before we make a decision.
All right, Katie, I'm going to start with you on this one. Was there a national security review?
Yeah, I'm as baffled as anyone sort of watching and trying to figure out that there definitely seems to be a contradiction. Honestly, this is one of these cases where I really, really miss minority parliaments, because this is a perfect example of where it would be great if we could have a House committee, heck, maybe more than one House committee, actually look into this, to call in officials, to call in them, to invite the minister to appear, to sort of get answers here, because at the moment it just appears utterly confusing, and there's no kind of, there's no easy direct route to get answers on what exactly went wrong, or sort of a rundown, but it's pretty clear that something seems to have gone amiss in the process, and there are, even if it's just sort of confusion over what actually took place in terms of a review, and I think the government really owes both the House of Commons and the Canadian people an explanation and some assurance that this didn't just fly completely under the radar and open us up to potential difficulties down the line.
Susan?
The way I read it, I understood that there's kind of two stages for national security reviews, and that this particular deal passed preliminary pre-screening, which is not as searching, but it didn't go through the full review that Tom Mulcair was talking about there. I have no idea what to think about this, and I'm sure I'm like a lot of Canadians in that regard. Are we concerned that the Chinese are going to take commercial advantage? They're going to steal technologies and ideas that were developed here, like in North America? Are we concerned that they're going to use the satellite telecommunications company that they bought to disrupt military maneuvers, or to cause havoc that way? Should we even be concerned? I mean, are the Chinese really still a threat? Is this government being naive? I wish I could answer those questions, but I sure understand the concern.
Okay,
it doesn't look good.
John, what do you think?
Well, I think Susan is in a fuddle, and well, no. She should be. First, it was my colleagues Bob Fife and Steve Chase who broke this story, and it was they who pointed out that there had been a security screen, a security study, but no formal national security review. Look, people on the left maintain that Canada needs to be sovereign, that it needs to stop being so reliant on the United States, and then they proceed to oppose any increases in defense spending, which is how you exercise your sovereignty. Similarly, they say we shouldn't be so dependent on the American economy, we shouldn't just be a branch plant of the U.S. And then when you turn around and look at the alternatives, you find that Sweden doesn't want to become our single biggest trading partner. Italy does not want to become our single biggest trading partner. It's countries like China and countries in the Middle East, and there's not always that pleasant in terms of human rights. And in China's case, they are a strategic competitor. Do we want to be selling? Or do we want to be acquiring foreign direct investment in areas of sensitive technology with a country that is competing with us in the Pacific for influence and dominance? It is incredibly difficult, but what really is difficult is finding anything that is credible in terms of Canada having alternative to close economic and security reliance with the United States.
Let's listen to what Opposition House Leader Candice Bergen had to say about why she thinks this is a national security threat.
This is shocking, Mr. Speaker. Hytera Communications has previously been accused of large-scale theft of intellectual property, and the UK has raised major red flags when Hytera tried to acquire a similar British company. Richard Fadden, the former head of CSIS, said that he would have recommended a full-fledged national security review of this deal. Why is the Prime Minister allowing his fascination with China and his overwhelming desire to appease them to cloud his judgment on the national security of our country?
Katie, what do you think of the way that Candice Bergen framed that question?
Well, I can understand as an opposition House leader why she would have put it in the most sort of terrifying way possible, which doesn't necessarily mean that this was all. I guess the question, which we still don't have an answer to, is, was a decision specifically made not to conduct a full review, or did they just not make the decision to do one? Because there's a bit of a difference there. It is more than just nuance. In other words, was Cabinet told, hey, you really might want to put this through the full paces, and they deliberately decided, nah, you know what, we're fond of China right now, let's let this go ahead? Or did it just never come up, and only now are the implications and the risks becoming public and aware? So again, this is why more information would really give us a good sense as to whether or not this was a deliberate decision to avoid that level of scrutiny, or just sort of by happenstance.
And at the very least, if the government says there's nothing to worry about, they've got to tell us why there's nothing to worry about. Tell us exactly how the whole deal works. Second of all, in answer to Candice Bergen's question of why is this government so eager to court China, it's because in the oil sands, for example, all the other multinationals are fleeing. They're either parking their assets or they're moving down south, and the whole economics of the oil sands is different from how it was back in Stephen Harper's day, when, as you recall, he did allow one Chinese takeover of a Canadian company, but then put the brakes on. It was a different economy back then.
Well, since you bring
I think
that
this
up,
speaks to desperation on the government's part.
This isn't the first time the Trudeau government has raised eyebrows and has been friendly to a Chinese proposal. The Hong Kong communications giant ONET got approval from the Liberals in March to take over a Montreal high-tech firm that specialized in laser weapon technology. And now the Canadian government wants to open up the oil sands to Chinese investment at all. And some people say the problem is not lack of investment opportunities elsewhere. So, what do you make of this, John?
Yeah, it's a conundrum. And by the way, I'm part of the confused middle on this as well. When I covered the Stephen Harper government, there were raging arguments inside the cabinet and caucus over what to do about China. Stephen Harper was himself very skeptical towards the Chinese. He saw them as a strategic competitor, one that was essentially still run by state-owned enterprises, that was still dominated by the ruling aristocracy in Beijing, and that we should not get too close to them. He personally reviewed the CNOOC acquisition of Nexon and granted it reluctantly with all sorts of red flags saying, don't ever expect to see this happen again. Now you have the Liberals in charge. The Liberals have always been very friendly towards China. You remember Jean Chrétien and his Team Canada missions back in the 90s. And there seems to be a shrug. Oh, who cares if they're state-owned enterprises? Who cares if there's intelligence assets that could be at risk? Who cares if we are, in fact, dealing with a strategic competitor? Who cares about human rights? Let's just full-on diversify our economy by developing close ties with China. And I want to see our economy diversify like everybody else. But these are not Boy Scouts that we're dealing with.
Well, no, but they're also one of the most innovative and dynamic economies in the world today. So it is a conundrum.
Well, it's an interesting point to end on. We're going to have to leave it there. We've kind of come full circle as we kind of examine this new world order that's on its way. That's the Sunday Scrum for another week. Freelance columnist Susan Riley, John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail, and Katie O'Malley of iPolitics. Thanks, gang.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Carol.